Should we get started? Yeah. Hello. Hi, everyone. And welcome to the School of Music at the University of Leeds. Thank you very much for being here this evening for this discussion on independent music and public relations. This is running as a hybrid event, so we've got sort of 15, 20 people in the room and hopefully a similar number on Zoom as well. And hopefully everyone can hear and see me okay, but if not, then let us know somehow. The idea is that we're going to have a little bit of audience involvement here, in person and online. Also, I should mention that the event is being recorded, which I think is the cue for someone to start recording, potentially being uploaded on YouTube at some point. This event is the first in a new series called The Music Exchange. The aim of this series is to, and I'm quoting, foster the development of new partnerships with non-academic groups and organizations, using staff research interests as a springboard to develop conversations that bridge the gap between research and industry. And that's certainly the aim today. I just want to start by saying thank you very much to my colleagues that are part of the Music Exchange Committee, so Dan Merrick, Alinka Greasley, and Scott McLaughlin for their support in organising the event, and to thank them and our panellists as well for rescheduling as well after the UCU strike action last month coincided with our initial date. So let me introduce our four panellists who between them bring a very wide experience, range of music industry experience and expertise. Really pleased to have you all here. We're going to get onto our kind of full discussion in a few minutes, but for now perhaps you could all just briefly introduce yourselves, your name, and a little bit about your work in music, perhaps starting with you, Sam.
Yeah, sure. I'm Sam Hind. I work for an independent music PR company called Freeman PR, based in London, but I work out of Liverpool and have done for about 5 or 6 years. I've always worked for independent music PR firms, so I've never worked in a label, and certainly not a major label, but our clients have ranged from major labels, currently working for Sony and their subsidiaries like Ministry of Sound and B1 Recordings, independent labels like Domino and Moshi Moshi, and increasingly independent artists who may or may not have distribution and label deals and things like that. And a few events and festivals as well, and music venues occasionally. But the bulk of my job now since 2005, which is when I started in music PR, has been promoting to print and online journalists, artists from around the world and across all musical genres, really.
Great, thanks. Tayeb?
Hey, I'm Tab. I've been writing about music for probably just under a decade now. And yeah, as a writer, I've contributed to just various platforms within and around music, from The Guardian to Pitchfork, Bandcamp, Wire Magazine, Crack, Facts, all of the kind of usual ones that you see out and about, I guess. And yeah, I've just been doing that on a kind of freelance basis for most of that time, so it's something that I do outside of my day job, and aside from that as well, I'm a DJ and I throw parties and record mixes and that kind of thing. I'm also an editor at the website Truants, which has been running for just over a decade now, and yeah, publishes work on electronic music mainly.
Great, thanks, Taya. Thea?
Hello, I'm Taya, and I work at the Leaf label, which is an independent record label that is based in Leeds, but it started in London about 26 years ago. I've been working there for 6 years, and I came in to sort of deal with just promo, but now I work as a label manager and A&R.
Hi, I'm Harry. I run a company based in Leeds called Hanglands. We're kind of communications and events agency is what we call ourselves. So we do a lot of PR for artists, mostly independent, some larger independent label groups. We also look after music festivals and various other events and conventions and other things like that, as well as some hospitality, some cultural projects, some council work, things like that. So we kind of, press is like a big part of what we do, but we also look after social. We do, digital and physical marketing and strategy and consulting and booking and all kinds. So that's us.
Great, thank you everyone. We're also later going to be joined by Janessa, who's going to be helping to moderate the Q&A section of the event. Janessa is a PhD student at the School of Media and Communications and also a freelance music journalist. So just to give you an idea of the structure of the session today, I'm going to start by asking for a bit of audience participation, and then I'm going to speak for a few minutes to try and contextualize music PR as a research subject. Then we'll have a kind of panel discussion for about half an hour, and then there should be roughly or up to another half an hour for audience questions. And for those of you attending online, if you ask questions as comments in the Zoom, and then Janessa is going to be kind of curating those and reading them out. The idea with this event is that it should be maybe beneficial in more than one way and to more than one kind of person. So I'm interested in music PR as a researcher, and I hope other people might be too, but I'm also keen for this to be useful for musicians, including some of our students who are here today, and who might be looking for kind of practical insight on how to get themselves heard and how to present themselves most effectively. So basically, please don't feel like there is any kind of wrong question to be asking, whether it's a kind of theoretical question or whether it's a practical question about how to do something. So if this isn't too patronizing, I did want to start by asking our audience here in person and online to participate in a kind of very small exercise, thinking about words and phrases that come to mind when you think about music PR. So if you either use that QR code on the screen there, or if you go to the Menti link that's at the top, it should be a pretty straightforward exercise to add in up to 3 words or phrases that you think of when you think of music PR. The responses are anonymous, by the way, but don't use that as don't take advantage of that. Obviously, if you don't feel like you know much about music PR, then maybe you can just think of some things that you associate with PR, or that a combination of those words brings to mind. If someone could give me some kind of signal that this is working for them, that would be great. Okay, thanks, Janessa. I'll give you kind of a moment, but I'll probably just keep talking as well. The reason for doing this really is that, I was asking the panel members whether there was anything they wanted to discuss or, get a better understanding of. And one thing Harry mentioned specifically was that, the term PR is arguably quite a loaded term, or that people might have particular connotations or associations with what that job involves. So I thought this might be one way to start, and it might give us something that we can either build on, or potentially, we can start to separate the kind of myth from the reality in music PR. And we'll kind of show the results as they're being populated there, and you guys can see it on the screen at the front. Okay, so I'm going to talk maybe for sort of 10 minutes or so, if that's okay, about PR as a research topic, and then we'll get into the discussion and you guys can be fixated on the screen. Great. So my personal interest in PR goes back about 10 years. I'm a musician myself with a kind of DIY background, I suppose, and most of the music I've made personally has not been of interest to that many people. But in 2013, I played a show in Bristol, where I'm from, which was like a house show. It was actually in my bedroom. And it really was just a show for friends, but there happened to be someone there who came along who worked in music PR, and they'd come to watch one of the other bands. But the next day they got in touch with me and asked if they could do some PR for my band for free. And I said yes, despite really having no idea at all what that would mean. And even though it seemed kind of faintly embarrassing to have any kind of representation or anything. And I think he maybe asked me for some photos, maybe asked me for some MP3s, and then kind of got to work doing whatever it is that he did. Seemed to be mostly emails. And like very quickly, within like a week or two, my band was getting write-ups, nothing massive, but like small write-ups in the kind of magazines and blogs at the time that, were probably exactly the same ones that we'd been emailing ourselves to no effect at all. And that ended up kind of really having quite a substantial impact on my life. It didn't quite lead to a full music career, but it did involve, it did lead quite directly to a contract with an independent record label, to support tours with bigger artists and things like that, which have been really big experiences for me. And even at the time, I felt a little bit torn about like just how immediate the impact of PR seemed to have been. In a way, it was kind of a relief because as a small-scale musician, maybe you assume that no one pays you any attention because your music is terrible. And so it was kind of, a relief to think maybe there are just some other skills that I don't have, like communication skills or something, that I didn't have access to. But I also thought, how was I supposed to have known about this world? How was I supposed to know that there were these kind of behind-the-scenes processes and networks? And at the same time, it also seemed that music PR could be really beneficial for artists. And I guess taking some of the weight off of their shoulders, I think most artists probably feel like they don't particularly love self-promotion. And it seemed, personally just very comforting to have someone take responsibility for that side of things. So as I've moved into academic work, I've always tried to be on the lookout for mentions of music PR in research and have been surprised by how rarely it's mentioned. So that's something I'm keen to do over the next few years, working with colleagues here in Leeds and elsewhere, is to examine the role of music PR and try and get a clearer sense of how it shapes the way we value music and musicians. I'm not going to try and do any sort of grand theorizing here because I don't think it's the place, and also because I don't have a grand theory, and also because there's a lot more expertise here. But I did just want to briefly introduce a few ideas that might be relevant from academic literature without wanting to prescribe any particular kind of analysis, just to kind of help maybe make mental connections that, for the discussion we're going to have. So just to highlight a few things. Firstly, the work of Paul Hirsch, who was a sociologist working in Michigan in the late 1960s, and he was one of the first academics to really consider the organizational structure of the music industry and the recording industry specifically. And for him, the distinctive feature of the music industry at that time is that there was an abundance of recorded music, or at least an abundance of musicians ready to make recorded music, but only a handful of songs could ever make it onto like top 40 radio playlists, and the very few could actually have enough exposure to become hits, basically. And so what he proposed was essentially that the recording industry was largely a filtering process, a kind of pre-filtering process designed to select between potential products, basically. And he pays particular attention to what he calls boundary roles, which are people working at the connections between different parts of the industry. And he argues that these are the people who you really have to convince. At every stage, a record or an artist really has to convince all these people working at the boundaries of each part of the industry. In the 70s, Pierre Bourdieu, who's a French sociologist, who's probably a better-known name, kind of popularized the term cultural intermediaries, which has become the default term in research to describe and define people who work kind of in between production and consumption of culture. And it's used in lots and lots of different contradictory ways. But there are a couple of aspects of it that I just wanted to highlight. Firstly, the idea of intermediaries suggests maybe a more two-way communication than the idea of this filtering system. And it also tends to suggest that cultural intermediaries, arguably, like music PRs, mediate between different sets of values. So, for example, between art and commerce, or between culture and economy. It also connects to ideas of social class in Pierre Bourdieu's work, and the idea that in late 20th century, early 21st century, a growing proportion of the middle class in particular are doing what we would call knowledge work, so working with meanings and symbols and, with communication essentially. And Bourdieu includes public relations as an example of this kind of work. And thanks for bearing with me. The last thing I wanted to mention is the idea of disintermediation, which is essentially the idea that the internet has reduced the need for intermediaries, that it's simplified communication to the extent that artists and audiences can have this kind of direct communication. But actually research by people including Brian Rax suggests that, in fact, possibly the opposite is true, and that the internet has kind of increased the need for cultural intermediaries. He studies musicians in Toronto, indie musicians, and suggests that basically the work that intermediaries do in terms of networking, in terms of strategic project management, is more important than ever because competition has been increased so much. And Rax is also particularly interested in kind of locality and whether the internet has changed, the need for everything to be in cities and towns. So yeah, those are a few of the ideas that I kind of wanted people to have in their heads as we get onto this discussion. But as I say, if as a musicians you have some more practical questions that you'd like to ask, then I'd be interested to hear those as well. Okay, so I haven't been paying any attention to this word cloud. Is there anything striking in there? I could hear some sort of giggling.
Getting paid to hang.
Paid to hang as well.
Paid to hang, okay.
I also quite like fluff.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, overall, maybe starting with you, Sam, yeah, is there any truth in this? I mean, I can see the words promotion, communication, marketing, audiences. How do you see any relation between this kind of thing and your day-to-day work, I suppose?
Well, not in the day-to-day, no. Well, obviously the promotion communication bits, yes, but the hanging and the fluffing and and being paid to hang, I think that's, for me on a day-to-day basis, that's not right. I mean, of course, like there are gigs to go to and there are parties and awards things occasionally through the year, but that sort of is a sort of, I think, a legacy vision of what PR perhaps was 15, when I first started doing it, 15, 20 years ago, the sort of golden age of the music industry more generally, really, rather than just the PR game, when there was more money around for all projects and there was a bit more of a hangers on every project. It's a lot of a leaner operation, I think, now. And a lot more of it is spent at your desk, communicating, promoting and marketing to journalists and communicating with the rest of the industry, for me. A bit less of the champagne and whatnot than would be preferable.
Right,
But
okay. Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah. And Harry, I mean, yeah, I think, or maybe could you say something about, because I mean, Hanglands doesn't really use the word PR as such.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of thought process behind that?
Yeah, I found that we, well, I mean, there's a bit of it was practical. So I had no intention of starting Hanglands. I worked for a bigger company, and the company, the two directors essentially fell out with one another, and we got made redundant. But I was in the middle of a load of campaigns and I had my own roster. So the choice I had was abandon all these artists in the middle of a campaign or set something up, and then it just went well and spiraled. But on my way up to that point, I'd done every job in music at an independent level, more or less. I'd worked, at an e-commerce platform. I booked festivals. I'd worked at labels. I'd run a venue. I'd just done like a lot of different things. So it didn't seem to make sense after about 3 months. And we launched, it was called Hanglands PR, and then I just cut the PR off because it just didn't make sense. And also just, I just aesthetically, I just like the one word a little bit. But no, I think, I think the communication being right in the centre does feel quite important to me. And as we, especially on like an independent music side, and even more with maybe with the festivals and stuff, as you can rely solely on press a little bit less as it gets squeezed. It is just about kind of getting that core message out there, however you do that. And it was like by them working on projects as like a communications lead rather than a PR lead, it felt a bit like, well, we can attack it from different ways and do things like, okay, well, we're trying to get someone, we want to do this feature and we want to explore this idea and just no one's biting, but we can maybe get this out this way via socials, and maybe we can just, maybe if there's a budget, all right, maybe this is too specific, maybe we need to just pay and do some ads or some advertorial on it, whatever, just so, yeah, communications to me feels more what we do, and there's just a broader thing.
Right, so just to clarify that distinction, PR, we're talking about essentially what we might call earned media rather than yourselves being responsible for an advertising budget.
I'd say so, and I'd say like one of the issues, and I don't know, Tab, if you may be better to speak on this, but is people in our profession not understanding the difference between PR and marketing, and wanting publications to say what they want them to say, which is marketing, versus saying what they want them to think, right? So going to a journalist and saying, look, I have this artist, I think you two could have a really interesting exchange, and these are some of the reasons I think you have an interesting exchange, is PR. Going to a publication and saying, I want you to say that my artist is the next Phoebe Bridgers, that's marketing. And I don't know if you have that with PR saying to you, I want you to do this feature and I want you to say this.
I mean, very, very rarely.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of the time they are saying that, but just in a softer way. It's how they sort of pitch the artist, right? It's not saying I want you to say that they're this, and this. It's they're introducing the artist as this, and this. Yeah. And you know, I guess the thing is when it comes to writing about artists, you know, whether it's, you know, something that is sort of on the more, you know, critical or like reviews and that kind of thing, or just general like news, coverage is coverage, and the language. There's an opportunity then for, you know, the people pitching the artist to editors, to journalists. They're also pitching the language used to describe the artist and you know the framing of the artist, and with the way the kind of landscape for media is at the moment, and in my experience has always been, but you know I've only been sort of in this area of work, you know, post social media. Writers don't have a lot of time to work on stuff, so it can be very effective, you know, pitching artists in a certain with a certain language in mind, and then that just suddenly becoming canonized, I guess, as what that artist is. You know, I guess I think about Wikipedia a lot, and like, you know, how on Wikipedia, like, you can't like write about yourself, but what you can do is you can use like another source that describes you to sort of describe yourself. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like what you know, PR and marketing people might do is pitch the artist in a certain way, and then suddenly it becomes like a unanimous view. It becomes canonical. It becomes how everyone thinks about the artist. But I think, you know, it's a bit like, you know, how Hanglands is not specifically like, you know, your experience is there's so many levels to it across music. Most people are kind of doing more than one job these days. So there is a bit of PR and there is a bit of marketing, but there's also a bit of, you know, some press releases are much more interrogative of artists' work than the reviews that you see appear in the press sometimes. So yeah, there's kind of a little bit of everything from the PR at that point.
Thank you. We've talked already about the differences between PR and marketing and things like that, but it would be great if we could just get a really, even if quite general sense of what day-to-day work is in music PR or in your kind of your related work. When you, I was going to say when you get to work at 9 a.m. on a Monday, but maybe that's an assumption in itself. What does a typical day look like? Perhaps we could start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I know it's
sure.
only part of what you do with the label, but
I mean, often it'd be Monday, maybe 10:30 a.m. And I will probably just follow up on the emails that I've had over the weekend. That's sort of just press related. So I'm having requests for artists on the label to do interviews or for MP3s for radio shows. So yeah, I'll just be getting back to those, and then potentially if we're working on a campaign, whether that be a single or an album, I will prioritize what artists I'll be working on that day, because I'm working with, it can vary from 4 to 5 campaigns to just 1 or to 10. So generally it would just be sort of getting back to any requests and then prioritizing what I'll be pitching that week, making sure we've got all the assets that we need, down to press release, photos, making sure that we've got perhaps a sentence or two from the artist that they want to have included. Generally speaking, that's how a week would start in the press world at a label, I think. A lot of the time you're chasing artists for things as well at the start of the week, just to make sure that you've got everything that you need. So I always have a checklist that I kind of run through, really.
great, thanks.
I guess my days are always sort of focused towards a series of like release dates. So I've got like a sheet of forthcoming pieces of content, and there'll be singles, there'll be albums, there'll be videos, mixtapes sometimes, things like that. And I'm constantly working, so I might be drafting a press release for something that's coming out in 3 months' time, for example. So today that was mailed. I've got an album from an Australian artist called Alex the Astronaut, and that's coming out in July. So that today has been sent to writers and editors at long lead print publications, who will have to make a decision about what they're putting in Mojo and Uncut and things in the next 4 weeks or so for that issue. So that's going on at the same time with the same artist. She's coming to play Great Escape in, is it 3 weeks' time? Whenever it is, Without my calendar in front, I'm a bit lost. So I've also sent that album to a handful of bloggers and people who I know are going to be at the Great Escape. So you're kind of advancing content all the time like that, really. And then there'll be something coming out this Friday, I can't remember what, that'll actually have to be mailed out on the day to everybody else, who gets it on the day the public get it, and things like that. So, and alongside that, there's that kind of planning schedules with labels and so forth, and just trying to make sense of a plan for something that isn't really in the schedule yet as well. And giving them the information about what the PR will require, because they're thinking about everything else, like manufacturing and all those sort of things as well. So the chance that they'll be able to think about the press lead times and things, and radio lead times isn't, it's another thing that they need information from us on.
Right, I see. So a lot of working backwards from
Yeah.
delivery dates, essentially, and doing the maths.
A lot of working backwards.
One thing I wanted to ask, which you kind of touched on, is the artist's position in all of this. One of the things I'm interested in is the idea that this PR work is actually kind of shaping the artist's brand, if you like, or maybe a less, commercial word for that. It shapes how we interpret the artists as consumers. How involved are artists in PR campaigns or in communication campaigns?
I mean, in my experience, it's like there's a huge variation in it. So to look at Hangland's roster specifically, I found that it definitely varies on like the age of the artist as well a lot of the time. So we do the odd bit, and it's sort of I really enjoy it, but it's a bit of a hangover from something that came with me from the old company. We do like a lot of catalog stuff. So, you know, those can be like 50th anniversary box sets, and the band are 78 and they just don't care. You know what I mean? And so there's no like brand to be shaped there or something like that. That is making sure that it's in Mojo and it has a broadsheet and do you know what I mean? And that's quite by the numbers because they exist and they have their own place in the musical history, and they just exist where they are. So that you find that you have very little influence. So it's not all the time. We've done press for a band called The Pretty Things for, I don't know, 5-6 years now, and Dick Taylor, who founded the Rolling Stones and quit to found The Pretty Things, one of a long line of bad decisions. He, you know, when we're on a campaign with them, he's ringing me all the time, and he just wants to talk about stuff and check in and stuff. So it still varies, but yeah, with younger artists where we're doing, you know, debut projects and stuff, it's really involved. Like, well, this is how I want to be presented, or poring over language used and things like that. And yeah, so I just find it to be like a huge variation, which may be an unhelpful answer.
No, not at all. Anyone else on that?
Yeah, I find it's really varied as well. I mean, sometimes I've worked with artists that we've signed, and initially I might think that we'd have to sort of help them create their identity, and that's quite fun as well because you're actually part of the creative process. We worked with this artist called Craven Foltz, and he kind of came to us as he was just a modular analog composer, but he didn't want anybody to know who he was. But he had no name, he had no real story. He just took these incredible landscape photographs and made great sweeping analog synth music. And we sort of helped shape his whole story, really. And that was one part of it. And we also sort of helped write the press releases, which obviously put that story into words. And then there are other artists that come to you with, like Harry says, that they know exactly what they want, and they'll be quite on your case with, why am I not in this magazine, or why am I not in this magazine? Do they not know what we are? So yeah, it does really vary. But I think both sides of that is actually really interesting. I think it's quite fun to have a wider team helping you, but also it is really great to have a really strong opinion and know what it is that you want as an artist.
But then, can I just pick up on that phrase, shaping the story? What does that, you know, involve for you? What kind of decision making is involved in that if someone doesn't have, you know, a story except for some photographs?
It's a conversation I feel you probably have quite a lot at a label and with PRs as well. Sometimes if we're just working on like instrumental music, we'll sit there and go, okay, well, what's the story here that's just an hour and a half of free improv jazz? Not sure how we're going to shape this story. But actually, sometimes when you really question an artist or sit down with them, listen to the music with them, they'll just sort of start talking about the experience, and then that will then sort of be put into words, and slowly the story kind of pieces together, whether that's sort of just from their first album or second album. Perhaps also you'd want to find out more about the history of the artist, if they've been involved in any other projects before, and sort of just make it all line up in their own heads, really, and then just be part of the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Tab said before, you don't really always have the time as a writer to sort of go digging around and finding out the story about a band straight off the cuff. Sometimes it's presented as a, you know, this band has a story behind it, which allows the writer then to go, right, okay, that's somebody I want to interview them about that. And a lot of times bands don't understand what's interesting about them as well until they actually start talking to them. So I work with a band from China called Retros, and they came over for the first time, and we were chatting to them. And I think being a band from China is quite interesting to begin with. I mean, but as I talked to them, they'd been around for quite a while in China, so they're an indie band, but they'd done like sort of 3 albums, so they're kind of well established within a scene there. So they'd started making music about 10 years ago. This is about 2 years ago. And so I started having a conversation with them, and it turned out they'd started to discover music before there was a large amount of access to the internet and file sharing and stuff. They'd got their Western music, Joy Division albums, The Cure, because they sounded a lot like Joy Division and The Cure, from recycled waste that we were sending over there. So they were buying on the black market DVDs and CDs that were being sent from Europe to be processed in China, and buying on the black market these Cures. So they'd be going through stalls and found a Joy Division record and taking it home and listening to it, which is to us is a kind of really refreshing, unusual creation story for a band. And so they started just trying to make music that sounded like these records that they were finding. So I found a story there out of just conversation with them, which we probably wouldn't have got to the bottom of, because they would have never got to the opportunity to really sit down with a journalist and get that if we hadn't already teased the story out of them and got what was their hook, really, in that instance.
Maybe the paid to hang thing is a little bit true, because
Oh yeah, I suppose I've just given myself away, haven't I?
but it is quite important though, isn't it? Because like, you know, we're working with 2 songwriters at the moment, and one, the struggle that he and we're having is that he is writing these brilliant songs, and that is it, right? He wants to sit in his room and write these brilliant songs, and there's nothing else. And the other artist has written this beautiful record, but it's a very, very, very personal and pretty raw account of living through abuse for a number of years and then dealing with that. So she's incredibly involved with how that's presented and the way it's presented and the words that are used. And we're incredibly involved and, you know, appreciate her involvement in going through that to make sure that's presented exactly right. So there is kind of an element of, with him, it's trying to dig it out. What are we actually talking about? And with her, it's trying to make sure that what is put out is true and fair and right to her. And, you know, in another way, again, with the Pretty Things, we had, you know, I'm happy to say we had the most success of PR had with them for 40 years, because we sat down and talked with them for a long time, and they'd been pushing like, oh yeah, it was the 60s, it was crazy. It was just nuts, we were the bad boys. And I was like, well, I just don't think people want to hear about that anymore. I just don't think people want to hear about you guys being out of control in the 1960s. And then we dug into it, and a lot of that wasn't actually true. So they got chased out of a venue in Edinburgh by the police. They didn't get chased out of a venue in Edinburgh by the police because they were crazy. They got chased out of a venue in Edinburgh because it was 1965. Phil was openly bisexual and had his boyfriend who was there, who was a black actor. So the head of police in Edinburgh came in and said, after this gig, you're gone. And they drove him out. They were the first band that ever got banned from a country. They got banned from New Zealand. So, oh yes, because we were so crazy. Well, again, it turned out that's not the truth. The truth was they were doing a press junket, and they said, why does the Maori journalist go last? And they went, no, we don't have racism here. That's you in America. Don't try and do that. And they went, all right, we'll let him go first. And they went, no. They went, well, we're not answering any more questions until he goes first. So the stories went, well, they're out of control. So they got banned from New Zealand and Australia. So we dug into this stuff, and it was like, well, actually, they were politically radical in the 1960s. Phil was arguably the first man in Britain to have long hair. He had hair down to his waist, and he was called a pervert for it. But at the time, it was like, well, we can't talk about that. We just have to talk about how you're bad lads. And it was only through hanging out with them in a bar in London did we realise that actually, and it took me being there and not 50 or 60 and having been from that school of, well, this is what we need to talk about, we dug into it, and then we kind of said to The Guardian, we'll talk about everything. We'll talk about absolutely anything. Talk about what you want. And then these stories got told, and it was amazing. And they sold a load of records. They've had a bit of a reappraisal since. It's been great. So I do think the Paid to Hang in that instance was great. I take it back.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. It sounds like you're saying that sort of there are always multiple stories that could be told about an artist, and that not all artists have the strongest sense of what's going to, even if they have a story that they identify with, it's not going to be necessarily the one that is the most powerful for other audiences. I mean, Teo, could you, as a journalist, how much do you, I know it sounds like the wrong word, but rely on those stories, or how much do press releases serve as a kind of basis for your writing?
First, just to react to a bit of the previous discussion, I'm always interested in how much, how much the artist sort of interfaces with the PR around their work, because, it sounds like it's a range, and I'm always interested in who does and who doesn't, because you do see some artists kind of, to be an artist is a very vulnerable thing, and then, if you gain visibility from that, like, that can be cool, but also it's a scary thing, it means that, like, there are so many people just sort of opening up and just, like, really, like, getting hands-on and into, like, this cool part of yourself. And, that can be difficult, and I know that there are a lot of artists who, aren't satisfied with, or, think they're being, think that they're being done wrong by the way that they're written about, say, in the music press, but maybe they don't necessarily realize that some of the ways that they're being written about in music press comes from how they're being sort of pitched, or how they're being represented by music PR, and they don't necessarily understand that in a roundabout way. It's kind of come from themselves because they're paying someone to represent them, and that's how they've been represented, and that's the reflection that they're then getting of themselves. And just on, artists having like multiple stories, is not an infrequent thing where an artist feels like they've kind of been shoeboxed into just, one mode of existence, like, oh, that's, I don't know, like, oh, that's that artist who had the recycled music, and then they're that, that's them for life, you know what I mean? So I think it can be it's interesting to look at, really. And yeah, it does make me wonder how much time they spend with that. In terms of how much time I spend with it as a writer, I think if it's, the thing I'm looking for most when I check an email is just a little bit of context as to, what the music is. And a lot of the time, you do get that where it's like, oh, this really interesting bunch of musicians made an album together, and that's the context, and it's not much of a story, but it's the context. And that can be like a perfectly fine context, or it can be, this whole entire story, or it can be, I don't know, I see a lot of, just like in my inbox in the subject line, it will just be like queer electropop from Berlin. And, it's kind of a really like crass reduction, I guess, of what someone is and what art is, and that kind of thing. But at the same time, someone's made a decision there to think, okay, well, this is the immediate context that needs to be communicated about this artist. And then other times as well, I'm seeing some artists kind of directly email me, but they all have the same format of the email, where it will just be like a total out of the blue email from someone I've never spoken to before, and it'll just be like, hi Tayab, when I was making this album, these were the things that I was thinking, and all of this stuff, and it's like extremely like formulaic. I'm seeing a lot of that now as well, But yeah, I mean, the hook for me is, what is the style of music, and that kind of thing. Is it something that's going to interest me because of what kind of music it is, or because of where it's come from, because of what scene it's a part of, that kind of thing, just that immediate context.
I think that context point's really important. I should point out, in my defence, that I didn't then go out and sell them as the recycled music band. I don't. But I should explain in like what point that something like that drops in a campaign. So with them, we like premiered one of their early tracks. Well, not their early tracks. The first track in the UK before they came over to play here, on like some credible website. So they were like on the Quietus here, and that was all led by the fact that we knew that sonically they would be liked by that audience and the writers at that publication. It also built up a bit of credibility. I think they also got a mention off the back of that in like The Guardian, just in like their playlist thing. So just listing the track and like a one-line quote from it. Which then meant that a few weeks later, I could go back into those writers who'd started writing about them organically and say, there's an interesting story behind these guys if you want to go in a bit further on that. And we ended up doing the recycling story came as part of a wider feature. It was a hook to get, say there's enough to write about here, to do like 6 pages with, Q still existed then. This is before the lockdown took Q out. So they did like a 6-page feature with Q. For like a band that are nowhere near the charts, that's kind of a huge amount of coverage. And it's because they got some credible stuff from people who like the music first, and then you can sell in a bit of a bigger story. To bulk it up a bit.
Yeah, great. I see. That sort of leads on to my next question, I think, which is what success and failure looks like in PR. Because, my very biased sense of it is that it can be hard to know kind of, what are reasonable milestones, or, I guess there's so much that's unpredictable about it, and also PR is not the only thing working in an artist's favor. So I guess when you're either as a label or independent PR, what does that conversation look like where you try and agree, what would success look like? And does that come into the payment of things at all, or is that kind of, maybe that's a slightly separate question, but yeah, what does success look like?
I mean, I've found before that my idea of what success looks like has differed from a label. So we've gone and we're like, hey, look at this. And they've gone, what? That's terrible. But I do think that's part of the job, is managing that, right? Managing what's reasonable and what you can expect. But I don't know, it's weird. It's definitely like, it can be a bit thankless. I've noticed with festivals more than artists, you get like, oh, we're in the Guardian Festival Guide, and they say, why aren't we in the Times? And you go, okay.
The other thing where people come to you on like a new album and say, oh, you go, what PR did you get around the last album? Oh, it wasn't very good. Oh, we'll send it through. And they send through the PR, the press they got on the last album. I'm like, that was a pretty good, they had a pretty good run on the last album. So,
I've just started saying, I would deem that to be quite good. just to get it out of the way.
Changing the PR because we didn't get much on the last one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it, again, unhelpfully, it varies, doesn't it? And I think it's a part of knowing the audience a bit and who you want to reach. So, reaching, if it's about reaching as, I don't know, because sometimes I think it's easy to fall into a trap where it becomes about you and what you can get and what you can get for your artist rather than what's right for the artist. And that can be easy to fall into if it gets a bit competitive. And so I think there's an element of like, well, if you were, it's probably quite relevant to Leaf because what you do is quite niche, it's quite specific.
Yeah, and very varied.
Yeah, and very varied. So I suppose my point is, would success for, like, I don't know, an artist like Matthew Bourne be something with, like, electronic sound? Could that be more impactful, even though it's technically a smaller title, than a major feature in a broadsheet? Or do you know what I mean? Like, is it better to reach? Is it better to reach 10,000 people who are interested than 750,000 who aren't? I suppose that's what I'm trying to say slowly.
I tend to find that when I'm working on the more niche releases, you know, I know which journalists like that type of music, and I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to reach loads of journalists. I would just reach out to, you know, it could be as few as 5. You know, I'd get in touch with the major print magazines. I know who would want to write about jazz for those. But success really varies, I think. And I think some campaigns that I work on, press is no longer the most important thing, whereas it used to definitely be the way you would sell records. And I feel like every year it's becoming less of that, dependent on what kind of music it is. So some artists, if we're trying to start them out from scratch, we would try and get them into the tastemaker type magazines. I mean, in sort of a left field world, I think probably The Quietus is a leading publication that tends to then open quite a few more doors once you've been in there. Other journalists tend to get in touch and say, oh, I saw this in there, can I hear more about it? So yeah, it's kind of just picking the right place where you think other people might pick it up. And then with an artist that perhaps isn't for the slightly, maybe older audience, we would probably put press to the back and think of other ways of initially breaking an artist. A lot of that being we put more focus on radio and more focus on live, really. And helping them get out on tour.
Great, thank you. I mean, I have tons more questions, but I think it's probably time to let someone else have a go. I think what we're going to do to try and get questions from online and in person is that we've got a roving mic at the back here. So if anyone has questions in the room, just put your hand up. And in terms of the Zoom, if you just want to type them in and Janessa will kindly kind of curate and read out. Yeah, if you want to come up to the front here, Janessa. Thank you. Okay, so we've got one question in the room here.
Yeah, a few of you mentioned about the differences between PR today versus 10 years ago, for example. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on the direction of PR and maybe where the key differences might be between now and in 5 years' time.
I still think it is important, and I still think it will be there in 5 years' time. But I think people will be thinking about new ways to promote their artists continuously, whether that's visually or in the press. I think with fewer print magazines and fewer scope for large features, there's more and more music all the time, and seems to be less magazines all the time. So yeah, I think it's going to be constantly revolving. But I do think in 5 years' time it will definitely still be there, PR, and it definitely will still be important, no doubt.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, Sam, we were kind of chatting about this earlier and the kind of where you see things going.
Well, hopefully, yeah. I mean, it does. It's direct effect of like because I think, Harry, you're pulling a few more levers because you're across social media and things as well, whereas I'm sort of standing still quite in the traditional sort of written. It's on a lot of it's online and podcasts and pitching to that sort of territory as well, but it's kind of within that oeuvre of traditional music journalism. It's maybe a better way of describing who I'm pitching to. And I think that's going to be something that artists themselves, like your experience, aren't going to want to do themselves or should be doing themselves, really, because you've got to concentrate. An artist should be concentrating on the things that they can do well. And some artists will be really good at the social media. Some aren't. Some will feel like they've got a good connection with their local music journalist, actually, or, and that sort of thing, and feel like they can do it. So the actual function of a PR, I think, will still exist and need to be performed, because in the same way that a label manager will need to exist and a product manager and that sort of thing. The influence has changed of what music journalism and can achieve. As you say, I don't think it leads directly to sales in any way that it did 10 years ago, but it does have an influence within scenes and within the industry. I did something, a very, very small project for an artist, and actually a fine artist who does sculpture and things, but actually composes music for his installations. And he came to me and said, I've got an album's worth of stuff, I'm going to put it out. And so we did a very small campaign just targeting a few Scottish national papers and things, and got a couple of pieces out of that. He said it had no effect on his Bandcamp and his Spotify and things like that, but he got booked for lots of little support slots, and his music was recreated via loop, so it was perfect for him. And he's developed a network of promoters in Scotland that he can go and do his looped show with. So that was kind of perfect for him, had a value to him that wouldn't be the same sort of value that we would have wanted 10 years ago, perhaps, but it does still have a value. And I think the journalists that we pitched in now exist to answer your sort of 5-year projection question. Journalists operate across a lot of different platforms to the ones they used to. So my contact with Laura Barton from The Guardian, she doesn't write quite as much as she used to for The Guardian, but she does Radio 4 shows and she does podcasts and she does. So that relationship and her output is still really important to be reached. So, yeah.
I do kind of feel as well like the way it's going to look in 5 years depends on how much the industry wants to support it. And I see a disconnect in how much the music industry or maybe the recording industry values press. I see like a dissonance with how much it values press, with how much it seems to want to support it. You know, and I say this as someone who runs like a company that's only 4 years old, but it seems like the amount of jobs on our side of the fence just keep going up and up and up. And the amount of jobs on the other side of the fence just keep going down and down and down. And that feels very unsustainable. And I think there's an element of like, you know, recently had a conversation with a publisher of a quite big music monthly, and they have an artist. They supported an artist over about 18 months, covers and did tours with them and features and all kinds of stuff, and they put a record on a major label, and the major label didn't spend £1 with them. And it's like, but the major label want their cover, they want them to do their breaking artist tour, they want them to do all of this kind of stuff. And I do think there's an element, and I try and throw as much as our marketing budgets as much of our budgets as is responsible for me to at independent publications, because I do think there's a dissonance that is only going to get worse. So I do think there's like an element of like, we've all accepted that Facebook and Google, you know, flubbed the figures to kill publishing, but still we all pretend that the only way to do it is to throw money on Google. So,
Great.
yeah.
I'm going to make sure that we have a bit of time for questions through Zoom, if that's all right. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, go for it.
So Jake and Bethany have kind of asked a very similar question. With increasingly less money in the music industry in general, are music PRs having to become less fussy on who they choose to represent? I.e., is it just a job, or does taste matter?
Is that one that no one wants to answer?
I can't really answer that one, but
Yeah, I can answer that. It's kind of why we do so many different things, so we can keep the artist roster small and do stuff that we want to do and do stuff that we believe in. And we are a younger company. We don't have, you know, a massive roster that we can call on, and by doing festivals and other events and venues and things like that, it allows us to work with only artists we want to work with. It also allows us to keep costs down for independent artists by bringing that money in elsewhere. And so for sure, for me, it's like, yeah, I don't think we'd be where we are with the staff we have if we only did music PR 4 years in, I think, probably truthfully. I think it's the other stuff that pays for that.
I guess my sense is that for some journalists, certain music PRs come to be a source of, like, there's a kind of a trusting relationship there, that the idea if you're pitching something, it must be half decent, do you know what I mean? So I guess the question in a way is, how do you protect that reputation whilst also, paying the bills, I suppose?
Ultimately, we wouldn't work on anything that we didn't like, or moreover, I didn't think had some sort of, this is going to sound a bit pretentious, cultural value, i.e. it had a story that needed to be told, it needed to be heard. I just haven't done, and I'll give you the extreme example. At the moment, I'm working, just before Christmas I did a single and a video from Crazy Frog, okay? Now, I'm not going to go home tonight and listen to the Crazy Frog catalogue, okay? And needless to say, I wasn't on my playlists all the time until I got involved in working for Crazy Frog. But they came, it's on Ministry of Sounds, they came to me and said, there's some new Crazy Frog material coming out, are you interested? I said, okay, why? And he said, well, because actually, when you think about it, and we got into this conversation about it, and when you think about it, in an age of AI and blockchain and all this kind of thing, Crazy Frog, when it first came around, is actually a culturally significant in that, could have almost been created now.
It's hyperpop.
Yeah. To meet what a current trend in sort of popular culture, but was created 2005, I think, maybe longer ago than that. So I thought it was an interesting story to there. And The Guardian agreed. So
is that you, Teo, covering that?
Yeah, there you go. But so yeah.
Great. Teo, maybe you could say a bit about, do particular PRs come to have, are there names you look for, or does your, curation of what you get by email not really work that way?
Sometimes if I'm receiving a bunch of emails from PRs and, I notice that like a certain one has emailed me, I'm like, oh, cool, I want to know what they're pushing these days, because, I think it definitely helps when someone is pitching an artist to you because they believe in the artist, And that belief can come in a number of ways. Maybe they really believe in their work, or maybe it's a financial belief that their work is producing enough cultural value to be significant to an audience, that kind of thing. I think, again, it's the thing that, like, everyone is doing, like, a billion jobs all of the time. And, like, ultimately, like, the person, like, the entity on the other side of this email is not just, a PR. It's a person, and, maybe they love music, and maybe they have, like, a really, like, interesting history with music, and, a really good taste for it, and that kind of thing. So I'm trusting in their taste a little bit, and I'm trusting that they feel that they're emailing at me for a particular reason, because they think that I might like it, that kind of thing. Those are the successful kind of, or let's say, like, positive sort of occasions and interactions, but most of the time it is just like mail blasts and, blind shouts, oh, maybe you'll like this, or maybe you'll like that, and, it's a total crapshoot, who knows. But, it is like, there is a relationship that, the journalist has with the PR, especially because, they're both kind of relying on the same thing. If that big feature goes up in that magazine, that means, it needs to have had a writer who's written it, and, and that story wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the assets collected by the PR. And, it's a success for the PR if that story goes up. It's people aren't necessarily, like, working against each other. They kind of ultimately maybe want the same thing sometimes, so.
Great, thank you. Do we have any more questions in the room?
Yes, I have a question. Are only the extroverts people suitable to be the PR?
So was it only extroverted people?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you need to be an extrovert to work in PR? Or I guess more broadly, what are the skills or kind of characteristics that you think are most needed?
I don't know if you need to be an extrovert anymore.
I definitely don't think you...
Well, fingers
You-
crossed for you, eh?
Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah.
I think you have to have a good amount of professional security, not like financial security, but like professional security when like so much of what you're putting out is unreturned. And to go to an artist and say, I put your work out into the world and the world shrugged, it can be tough to be the one that delivers that news. But you have to have the professional security or the thick skin when they come back and say, no, the world didn't shrug, you did a bad job, which is a very reasonable reaction because it's not nice. Do you know what I mean? But I think you have to have a lot of security in what you're saying.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, you do have to be thick-skinned because, like you said earlier, it can be a grueling and thankless job. And when things don't go right and artists get upset, you have to try and keep them positive because you want them to keep on making music and retain being the great artists that they are. So yeah, I think you need to be just thick-skinned and you can take a bit of bad news.
I think being an extrovert in music PR, I mean, a lot of journalists are quite introverted, so I think it would be quite intimidating having some sort of like larger-than-life character insisting that you come along to gigs all the time. A bit of for some journalists, so I think you've got to be kind of a bit more empathetic, really.
That's it.
A bit more adaptable to the.
So
You have to go out for dinner with a lot of
Yeah.
and take people out for drinks or a coffee that like aren't necessarily a natural friend, if you know what I mean. So you've got to be kind of be able to rub along with people really quite well, I think. Which comes back to your point about being able to empathise with artists who are finding it difficult.
Yeah, I think it does require a lot of emotional intelligence as well. And like, you always kind of see that, you always see it on Twitter an hour after some horrible thing has happened somewhere in the world and someone will have screenshotted and be like, can't believe someone's pitching right now. And it's like, well, yeah, it is still your job to get that pitch today, but also, yeah, maybe there was a terrorist attack an hour ago and you should just stop. And I think a lot of it is about having emotional intelligence and knowing what to say and what to do. Or like, oh, I've got a record about abuse and you've tweeted about that. So do you want, I mean, that, do you know what I mean? It's that kind of, it's knowing to not then say like, oh, well, you've gone through that. So I, a stranger, would like to talk to you about it. It's just having the kind of emotional, I think a lot of it's about having emotional intelligence, dealing with artists, dealing with journalists, with ultimately two, creative jobs and just not being a dick.
Okay. As well, I'm rubbish at emails and keeping on top of my emails, whereas like I feel like you guys have to always be on it and like.
We did a thing a few of us met. We started like a little bit of like a Leeds writers and PR group, and everyone was like apologising, going like, "I'm sorry I never replied to your emails." It's like, don't expect to reply. Do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of got to take it. It's fine. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do we have any more questions on Zoom?
We've got a few questions, yeah.
I think
So
maybe one or two, probably.
One or two. Okay. Helena has asked, what's the best practice when reaching out for your own press when you're a DIY artist? What to and what not to include in the email? General tips for approaching someone who's looking for PR.
Snappy tips, if possible.
Come to me. Sorry, an artist who's looking for PR.
Yeah.
I would say do as much as, I would say this to generally if you're approaching the music industry, is kind of try and do as much as you can of getting your product, your content together, ready, what you want to be, building your social media profile that you feel you can do, which is within your skill set, before you start to think, okay, I need help with this, and it might be PR. So get your creative product, your art, to a place where you want it to be for people to see. Because once you start pushing it and have other people pushing it for you, then it's kind of harder to row back on what you've put out there. So be confident in what you've got ready to go.
Yeah, I think find the right person who is into that kind of music. I think sometimes people don't spend enough time trying to find exactly the right person to represent them. I get sent demos all the time, and sometimes I listen to them and just think, there is no way you've checked out what the Leaf label releases. So yeah, I just spend a little bit of time with it, actually, do some internet, what's it called when you're internet stalking? Yep.
Research.
Yeah, research.
Great. Maybe the time for one more question, Janessa.
One more. Gummo has asked, this is a bulky question, what does the alleged end of the album mean for PR work? So I suppose, how is PR responding to this kind of changing attention deficit, I suppose you might call it, with album campaigns and focus?
I mean, not to be a cop-out, but I feel with the genres and the world that we inhabit, that's not an issue. To be honest, I feel like people are still, the audiences are still wanting records, they're still wanting quite a traditional rollout. So I don't know, we haven't factored in for that, so maybe we'll like the dinosaurs, but I feel like the worlds we inhabit, I just think it's still people are still wanting an album.
Yeah, I certainly still feel like people want a full record, and yeah, I still feel that is an important thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, and artists still want to make them, don't they? It's something. Artists generally, I mean, genres differ, don't they? In dance music, a lot of people are focused on creating a great 12-inch single, for some people. But generally, artists are still want to create that body of work that feels like, right, I've been successful I've ticked a box of my career by releasing an album. That's sort of phase one, isn't it, for a lot of people? And it's probably changing anyway. Impact dates, I work in to release dates, have fragmented and changed anyway, so we've adapted a bit to that, finding more points in a campaign where you can create activity in the media and on social media and in the traditional media. So it's probably organically changing anyway, but as you say, there's still a large bulk of the musical fandom want to listen to albums, and until artists stop wanting to make them.
Yeah, I wonder if none of us are that best placed to answer it, because we all exist in independent music mostly. And I wonder if someone was here who was, head of marketing at a major who's talking about something completely different. It does feel, sometimes it feels like a totally different industry.
I still feel like they would probably answer it the same way, because of as well as the digital products, there's also the physical market still exists, and that is a huge part of independent artists' success is merchandise.
Yeah, I mean,
some
the
feel
couple of
that to
projects
go.
I've done for Ministry recently Ministry of Sound haven't been album campaigns, but they've had all similar elements of it. We were pitching a feature idea on Crazy Frog and on this Eden and Fatso record, which was a kind of viral phenomenon, club phenomenon, should I say. We're still pitching the story as if it's an album. I think the process was actually very similar, now I think about it, as if we were doing an album release.
I guess thinking about it, we're getting to the point now where we're not doing singles anymore in that respect, because I'm struggling because it's so much better to work longer term over not doing singles, but not doing one single. Kind of trying to move away from the idea that we are hired to just put a thing out and hope it does well. And we're moving now into a place where, with Hanglands, where we are working, and it's a luxury for artists and stuff. I understand that, and it's another financial barrier. But the idea of just, we're going to try and do one single and see what happens. I'm trying to get us away from that entirely and working with artists over a year or 2 years. And we worked with an artist. Their album came out in September to some minimal fanfare, and now it's just doing better and better and better and better, as we go on every week. So, yeah, I do think in that respect, the one and done for press, I think, is very difficult as the blogs have gone a bit.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop you there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions in person and online. Thanks, Janessa. Okay, just a few bits of housekeeping before we wrap up. I mean, firstly, and self-interestedly, obviously I'm quite interested in this as a research topic, so if there's anyone in the audience, online or in person, who is interested in connecting about these things, then please get in touch with me. My email's on my staff page, or you can chat to me afterwards. Secondly, the next event in the Music Exchange series is on the 22nd of June. I think the registration for that is now open. It's a panel discussion chaired by Dr. Matthew Pritchard, also of this school, entitled "What is a Musical Education For?" And you can tell I'm reading. The event will ask, what are the goals of institutional training in music, from school-age qualifications through to higher education, and what should these goals be in the 21st century? It will also ask, how might we reimagine music education as a more equal, liberated, and decolonized space? So I hope you'll join us for that. And then lastly, the bar will be open for a little while, I think. So please feel free to stick around and chat with us. And I'm sorry to the online attendees that we can't replicate the experience of Dan making you a cocktail. And yeah, I just want to close by saying thank you all very much for coming, and thanks again to the panel for their time and their expertise. It's really, much appreciated. Thank you.